This video walks through some of the most disturbing places in Elder Scrolls lore, one at a time. Most of them are Daedric realms inside Oblivion, which holds 16 or more of these planes, each one shaped by whichever prince rules it, so no two are disturbing in quite the same way. A few other places on this list sit inside Tamriel itself, touched by the Daedra without being Daedric realms of their own. Some are full of monsters and torture. Others turn out unsettling for reasons that have nothing to do with either one, and we'll get into why as we go through them. Let's start with Quagmire. Quagmire belongs to Vaermina, the Daedric Prince of Nightmare, and some sources call the realm the Dreamstride instead. Reality there won't sit still. Every few minutes, lightning flashes, and the whole place reshapes into a new scene, each one worse than the last, with no ceiling on how bad it can get, because the reshaping never stops long enough for anyone to adjust to it. Sleeping mortals slip into Quagmire without any help at all. A nightmare, in the literal sense this lore uses, is a person's mind traveling to this realm while the body sleeps back on Nirn. From her citadel at the center of the plane, Vaermina reaches out and harvests the memories of sleepers, and what she leaves behind in their place is nothing but visions of horror and despair. Her servants, called Omens, get sent out from Quagmire to haunt the people of Nirn directly. Even the wildlife carries the theme through. Wasps native to the realm build their nests out of nightmares. Almost the only mortal on record to enter Quagmire wide awake, instead of through sleep, was the mage Morian Zenas, who teleported in during a long private tour through the plains of Oblivion. Vaermina goes by a pile of names depending on who's describing her. The Prince of Dreams and Nightmares, the Weaver of Dreams, the Dreamweaver, the Dark Lady among them. Scholars call her one of the more demonic Daedra specifically because she doesn't destroy toward any goal, she just likes destruction, and her preferred method is torture. She's disgusted by mortals who hold on to a moral compass and delighted by the ones who sin big or kill without hesitation to get what they want. She counts Abonarm, Boethia, Periate, and Hermaeus Mora as enemies, and stays on good terms with Sanguine. Azura sits somewhere in between, at odds with her more often than not. Khajiiti tradition from before the Riddlethar Epiphany tells a rougher version of her. There, she's Vaermina, the lost daughter, a child Fadomai bore purely out of fear of losing her other children. Azura killed her in the underworld, and what's left of her can only haunt the dreams of the Khajiit now, since she lost the power to touch the lunar lattice directly. She tests people through fear instead, which is the only weapon still open to her. One account tied to that same myth says Noctra learned from watching Azura beat her and later turned the skeleton key on herself just to keep another prince, Merid Nunda, away from the Aether Prism during a battle to defend the lattice. There's a story in the 16 Accords of Madness where Vaermina gets outmaneuvered by Sheogorath himself, and it doubles as an explanation for why her realm needs madness to keep functioning at all. A bard named Darius Shano worshipped her and got nightmares in return, visions so awful that when he put them into his writing, the public couldn't look away. Sheogorath argued that hatred proves a mortal's worth more reliably than love does, and the two princes bet on who could pull more of it out of Shano inside 10 years. Vaermina kept the nightmares coming. Sheogorath did nothing at all. When her decade ended and the dreams stopped, Shano decided he must have imagined the whole thing, turned on the gods entirely, and wrote something mocking Tiber Septim's place among the nine. He was executed for it. His soul went to Sheogorath's realm, not hers, and when the two princes compared notes, Sheogorath's answer was that doing nothing had been his whole contribution, since a mortal robbed of the one thing that gave him meaning turns bitter and then mad all on his own. Vaermina is said to have taken the lesson seriously, that without madness there's no dreaming, and without dreaming nothing gets made at all. Her worship runs mostly through sleep. She talks to her faithful while they're unconscious, and some cults use blood sacrifice to keep her attention or to call Daedra out of Quagmire directly. A handful of her cults refuse to let their children socialize with anyone outside the group. Her priests are known as skilled alchemists, and their best product, a brew called Vaermina's Torpor, puts a drinker into something called the Dreamstride, a state that lets a mind slip into somebody else's dream and travel physical distance while it's there, turning up thousands of miles from where the body fell asleep once the effect wears off. It isn't safe. People vanish using it, and some never come back at all. During the interregnum, a cult called the Supernal Dreamers wanted to drag the whole waking world down into her darkness, on the theory that a life full of suffering, lies, and starvation deserved to be replaced with something undisguised, even if that something was nightmares. Separate from any of that, there are dreamwalkers, people who can step into another person's dream using nothing but a simple spell, with no clear teacher and no family history to explain where the ability came from. Some assume they must have sold something to Vaermina to get it, though nobody's ever proven that. Most of the ones written about in scholarly accounts turn out gentle rather than cruel, using the gift to strip a bad memory out of someone's head or calm a mind that's sick. Long before any of that, Vaermina made an enemy of Hermaeus Mora over a completely different matter. Sometime in the Merethic era, Mora decided the Daedric prince Ithelia had gotten dangerous enough with her power over fate that she needed to be stopped before she ever acted, and he went looking for allies. Azura, Boeotia, and Mephala signed on. Vaermina and Peryite refused, arguing that punishing someone for what she might someday do broke a basic rule between princes, that each one's own sphere was supposed to stay untouchable. Mora told them plainly he intended to go ahead regardless of what they thought, and when the moment came, he smashed Vaermina's own statue as part of the working and erased Ithelia from every mind in existence anyway, hers included. It's the kind of insult a prince doesn't forget, and it explains a lot about why Vaermina keeps showing up on the wrong side of Mora's schemes centuries later. One of her closer worshippers came out of Menevia, a Breton noble named Galtis who got so lost in dreaming that he decided the Menevia he dreamed mattered more to him than the Menevia he woke to. He started calling his dream home Reverie Menevia over and over, and the name wore down through repetition until it just became Vaermina. She noticed, came to him, and made him her consort, naming him the first Night Caller and turning him into something called the Night Terror, a shape-shifting creature built entirely out of dream matter. Centuries later, during the interregnum, he possessed the mind of High King Emeric of Wayrest at Vaermina's direction, and the plot only broke when Azura, who'd already seen the whole scheme coming, helped guide an intervention into Emeric's own dream to defeat him there. Vaermina has also handed out small, private chunks of quagmire as favors. A wealthy family of her worshippers got exactly that once, using a mining operation at Hozin's Folly on Bleakrock Isle as cover, while they built a portal and sealed it with something called an unspeakable sigil. They started work on a temple inside their new pocket realm, but it stayed smaller than they'd hoped, and scamps began turning up both inside it and back in the mine on Nirn. A ritual went wrong. The mine got abandoned, and the pocket itself wasn't destroyed until the portal was reopened and the sigil smashed, in the year 2582 of the Second Era. Quagmire and the ordinary world blur, wherever Vaermina's influence runs strong, usually near one of her own artifacts. That same year, she reached into the rift and merged an entire island, Skald's Retreat, with her own realm, enthralling a bard there into singing an old song that let Quagmire swallow the place whole. She also had her servants destroy every book or artifact on the island that mentioned her by name, since she doesn't much like being talked about. The whole island's population fell into a sleep with no end in sight, until someone woke the sleeping bards and had them sing a different, older Nord song instead, one strong enough to break her hold. Her signature weapon, the Skull of Corruption, works by cloning whoever it's aimed at and turning the copy against the original. One story about it, likely invented but told anyway because it's funny, involves a Thieves Guild leader who used the skull on an enemy, only to have the resulting duplicate steal the staff back and use it on her in turn. The clone of her enemy couldn't directly attack its own maker, so it made a clone of the guild leader instead, and the two duplicates supposedly ran the guild together for years, while the two originals sat somewhere forgotten. There's also an Orb of Vaermina, built for scrying, which a wizard named Arkved once stole out of the dreams of her own followers and installed in his tower in the Nibene Basin, turning the whole tower into a waking nightmare in the process, until the hero of Kuwatch tracked it down and brought it back to her. And oddly enough, when the Nerevarine came down with vampirism on Vardenfell and went to Molag Bal for a cure, since Bal is usually the one mortals blame for the curse in the first place, Bal reportedly had to go get the cure from Vermina after what's only ever described as a difficult conversation between the two of them. Nobody's ever explained why the fix for one prince's curse belongs to a completely different prince's realm. Vermina's omens do most of her direct work on Nirn, slipping into a victim's dreams and nudging them toward the worst version of every decision, sometimes toward murder, betrayal, or a war they never wanted. Killing one takes finding it inside the dream itself, since that's the only place it can be destroyed for good. Her most devoted followers are told the reward for good service is getting reborn inside Quagmire after death, to keep working at the omen's side. What an omen is, under the shape it's wearing, stays unclear, since they've been seen taking the form of Watchers, Dremora, and Wisp Mothers, or just disguising themselves as ordinary people. One of them, called the Omen of Deception, goes by the name Yikal and specializes in spreading lies and turning allies against each other. Summoning him needs 4 lit braziers, a human sacrifice already dead before he arrives, and his true name spoken aloud, since arriving to a sacrifice still breathing only gets a weakened version of him. He was killed working against the Supernal Dreamers cult in the year 2582. Another one, the Omen of Betrayal, has been seen across Tamriel for centuries under different names depending who's telling it. The Grey Sleep in Somerset, the Egg Terror among Argonians, the Visiting Breton among Orcs. It's the same omen blamed for the string of obsessions that plagued Gavaldon and for the desecration of an Azura shrine there. Morian Zenas kept a running account of his whole trip through Oblivion by staying mentally linked to his Argonian student back on Nirn, a bond the two of them developed almost by accident. Sources disagree on the exact order he traveled in. Some place Moonshadow first, others put Ashpit and Coldharbour ahead of it, and nobody's ever settled the question. As the tour went on, his messages back home got quieter and stranger, until they stopped making sense at all. What finally undid him was something called a known thing, not Quagmire itself, a piece of truth heavy enough to destroy any mind that touches it. He's the only mortal on record who lived through contact with one, though it changed him completely, splitting him, in a sense, into the version who wanted to learn everything just to pass it on, and the version left afterward who wants to learn only because learning feels good. He eventually shut himself inside Hermaeus Mora's menagerie for safety, surrounded by books, and stayed there until a Dremora clan loyal to Vermina attacked the place decades later, and he escaped in the chaos with an adventurer's help. There's a strange footnote buried in the record of how he ended up on this path at all. A colleague of his, Dr. Alphidia Lupus, came to believe that Divaith Fear, the same Dunmer sorcerer who taught Zenas the method for entering Oblivion in the first place, wasn't being entirely generous when he offered that help. She suspected Fear resented how much she favored Zenas over him, and that the whole expedition had been steered toward a man Fear expected never to return. At least one argument between the two men over her is on record. Whether that suspicion is fair to Fear or not, nobody who could confirm it is still around to answer questions. Now let's move on to Ashpit. Ashpit belongs to Malakath, the Daedric Prince of Outcasts, and no one is fully sure how the realm came to exist, or whether it connects to the old, disputed story of Trinimac's transformation into Malakath. Orcish spell rites are about the only mortals who bother calling on this realm for boons, mostly to summon flame Atronox, and the paths into Malakath's domain hide themselves on purpose, built to protect the disenfranchised and the cast out from anyone who comes looking. Mostly, the realm is just dust. Palaces built from smoke, creatures made of vapor, and air thick with anguish, betrayal, and broken promises, the kind that catches in the throat. Surviving a visit takes levitation and some way to breathe through magic, since the air alone can kill an unprepared traveler. The Mages Guild has bottled the realm's vapor for study back on Nirn. There's even a skeleton out there called the Spine of Ashpit, oddly light and made of grey dust, and Sheogorath has mocked it as the so-called backbone of the whole plane. Not every corner of Ashpit is hostile. Around the year 48 of the Fourth Era, Malacath brought a badly wounded Prince Atrebus Mede and his companion Sul into a hidden garden inside his own realm. Slender trees strung with vines and lily-shaped flowers, pale spheres drifting through a colorless sky. Every so often, those same vines would collapse into a swarm of black moths. The garden means something to Malacath personally. In his own words, it's barely a garden anymore, just what's left of something that used to exist, which is a strange thing to hear from a god of the abandoned. One who's homesick for a life even he can't get back to. For the orcs who worship him, dying and ending up in Ashpit isn't a punishment. At the center of Malacath's stronghold sits the Ashen Forge, a hearth that burns hotter than the sun, and orcish souls arriving there get thrust into its coals to be honed and tempered until they come out whole. Their grudges get melted down and folded into the next generation of mortal orcs who are born carrying resentment as a kind of foundation, and once that transfer is done, the immortal orcs of the Ashpit are free to start collecting new grievances all over again. The stronghold itself is said to stretch endlessly across the plains, walls 100 feet high built from polished steel and worked iron, reaching all the way behind the stars to Aetherius, so that every orc who earns it gets to cross over. Gentle souls skip the forge entirely. Those get handed to Trinimac instead, the old god this whole realm exists because of, according to Chimeri legend, which holds that Trinimac was cursed and twisted into Malacath during the Velothi people's flight from their homeland, forced into a shape he never asked for and has been ruling from ever since. Malacath's worship reaches well past the orcs he's best known for defending. Goblins call him Muluk, paint their idols blue, and know him as the Blue God, the same title ogres use when they call themselves his little brothers and blame their own mistreatment on people ignoring his protection. Dunmer count him among the four corners of the House of Troubles, alongside Molagbal, Mehrunes Dagon, and Sheogorath, and keep a shrine to him in the hills of Sheogorad that marks the first stop on a whole pilgrimage circuit. Even the Nords have a use for him, split oddly across two separate figures, a testing god called Mauloch, who pushes them into war and supposedly fled east after a defeat around the year 660 of the First Era. A death god called Orki, Old Knocker, blamed in an old song for tricking the once immortal Atmorans into accepting a mortal lifespan in the first place. None of that sits well with official Nine Divines teaching. Tiber Septim held that orcs, goblins, and trolls were what he called the miscreated, malicious brutes that decent people should unite against. A doctrine that flatly contradicts Malacath's own claim to be protecting exactly those groups as a wronged father figure rather than condemning them as monsters. Chimeri legend fills in more of the mechanism than just cursed and twisted. That same tradition holds that Trinimac, before any of this happened to him, was Auriel's greatest knight, called the Warrior and the Paragon. A hero who once tore Lorkhan's own heart out with his bare hands after the Sundering and helped hide it once he and Auriel realized it couldn't be destroyed outright. The story goes on to say Boethia devoured Trinimac whole and wore his shape to trick the fleeing Chimer during Veloth's exodus, then forced what was left of him into the twisted new form of Malacath. A different version, kept alive by some of Hrothgar's own orcs today, throws all of that out, holding instead that Trinimac was never cursed at all, that he gave himself over to Nirn's creation the way any other Aedra did, that his presence can still be felt in the world itself, rather than trapped inside a god of outcasts. Neither side has ever settled it. Malacath has a son by at least one account, a demi-prince named Ameg Grokaira, once known as a great orcish warrior in his own right. Sheogorath, in disguise, gave Ameg a sword called Nebkreshen as a gift, and the blade brought out a bloodlust in him that ended with him murdering a young orc girl and running. Sheogorath then summoned Malacath to the scene and goaded him into taking up the hunt personally, and Malacath tracked the killer down and beheaded him without knowing who he was chasing until it was already done. Only then did he realize he'd just executed his own son and damned him to Sheogorath's realm in the same stroke. Sheogorath kept the head, still talking, and kept the sword too. Malacath stayed where he was and listened to his son's voice fade into the distance. Malakoth's justice, when he hands it out through mortals, doesn't always land on the right target, and one story on record makes that plain rather than glossing over it. An orc named Karag Grokar had once been denied glory in battle by his Dunmer partner, Orin Bearclaw, and generations later, the Nerevarine avenged that old grudge by hunting down Orin's supposed last descendant, a man named Farvin Orin. Farvin confessed on the spot that the whole story was a lie before he attacked anyway, and the record states outright that Malakoth was simply mistaken, that Farvin wasn't the last of that bloodline at all. The reward for killing him, the helm of Orin Bearclaw, ended up sold off to a museum in Mournhold not long after. A near-identical pattern shows up again centuries later at the orc stronghold of Largashbur. A wise woman there, named Atub, believed Malakoth had cursed the place, and the chief, Yamars, was already being humiliated by a summoned vision of the god for failing to deal with a nearby giant camp. Rather than face the giants himself, Yamars tried to trick a passing hero into killing the giant chief so he could claim the win, an almost exact repeat of what Orin Bearclaw once did to Karag. Yamars died in the attempt, under circumstances nobody has ever fully pinned down, and Malakoth named a replacement chief on the spot and turned the recovered warhammer into Volendrung as a parting gift. Volendrung itself started out as a dwarven relic belonging to Clan Rorken, before it somehow turned Daedric, a hammer that can flatten walls, paralyze on a hit, drain strength out of anyone it touches, prone to disappearing for years or centuries at a stretch the same way its original makers did. The brutal bands, heavy iron rings forged in Ashbit itself and charged with the realm's own dust, carry fragments of Malakoth's true name inside the metal. A sword called Scourge, made in something called the Fires of Fickledire, banishes any Daedra summoned against its wielder straight into what's described as the Outer Darkness. Even Sheogorath has taken something off him, a trinket called the Lost Button that Malakoth's own followers consider an abomination just for existing, plucked once from his doublet as a joke that stuck. Next, let's take a look at Moonshadow. Moonshadow belongs to Azura, the Queen of Dawn and Dusk, and it breaks the pattern of Quagmire and Ashbit entirely, because the realm's problem is beauty, an amount of beauty the lore itself calls too much, enough to leave mortal visitors half-blind just from looking at it. Waterfalls, fields of flowers, pink blossom trees, and a whole city built from silver. Azura lives there in a palace made of roses, and she welcomes mortal visitors, which is rare for a Daedric prince. To the Khajiit, this same realm is where Azura tends the gates of the crossing, the bridge between the living world and whatever comes after it, and the worthy get guided onward from there to the sands behind the stars. One myth traces the realm's origin to grief. Azura wept in the great darkness after her mother died, and the light from her own tears drove the darkness back and left behind a place made only of moonlight and shadow. Another Khajiiti story lands harder. Magrus, the sun god, fled here half-blinded after Boethra had already torn out one of his eyes, and Azura looked at him and judged him too fearful to hold a sphere of his own. She tore out his remaining eye herself. Blind now in both, Magrus fled up into the heavens, and Azura took the eye she just removed and turned it into the Aether Prism, a stone built to reflect the Varlian's Gate. That's the story behind the prettiest realm in Oblivion, a god weeping herself a paradise, then blinding someone inside it out of what she called judgment. Physical pieces of Moonshadow have made their way to Nirn over the centuries. Crimson shards, large glowing red crystals, turned up in Aldrun during the Second Era. Rose Foundation, a cosmetic made from the pink petals of the realm's flowering trees, gets imported and sold. Several pieces of Daedric armor found on Nirn are thought to have come from Moonshadow originally, since they carry the same strong light enchantment and otherwise look unremarkable. The mage Morian Zenas came back through here too, on the same tour that took him briefly through Quagmire. Moonshadow was the safe stop on his itinerary, the one he tried first before pushing on towards stranger realms and eventually losing himself completely in Apocrypha. Azura later sealed off the regular gateways into her own realm after a falling out with the god Vivek, so the safe stop didn't stay open forever either. Azura's reputation among her own worshippers carries an edge that doesn't quite fit the postcard scenery, Believers describe her as cruel but wise, and legend holds that she bewitches some of her followers into becoming little more than devoted, willing slaves. She is said to want her followers' love above almost everything else, and it reportedly pains her when they fail to love themselves in turn. Faithful who swear complete loyalty can be granted fiery azure eyes, the same trait shown by mortals who return from a stay in Moonshadow itself, a small, permanent mark of having been somewhere too beautiful to be entirely safe. Azura carries a long list of titles beyond Queen of Dawn and Dusk, among them Azura of the Crimson Gate, the Mother Soul, Mother of the Rose, and the Twilight Queen. Her sphere covers more than just the space between day and night, reaching into mystery, prophecy, and even vanity. Whether she counts as one of the saved Daedra depends entirely on who's answering. Dunmer tradition usually names her, alongside Boethia and Mephala, as one of the 3 good Daedra their people can trust, yet other sources place her among the allies of Molag Bal, of all princes, which sits badly next to what happened to one of her own most devoted servants. A First-Era Azurite named Kulanwe once brokered peace between warring Nede and Aelid factions after exposing a murder committed by one of Baal's own agents. Was later captured and dragged into Cold Harbor, where Molag Bal tortured her for millennia, a fact that clearly troubled Azura even by her own account. Whatever alliance exists between the 2 princes, it hasn't stopped Baal from treating her people as playthings when he gets the chance. Azura's biggest role in Dunmer history runs through Nerevar, whom she chose as her champion and blessed with a ring called Moon and Star, forged by one of Kagranak's own smiths before the First Council even existed. The ring kills anyone who wears it except Nerevar himself, and it gave him the persuasive power that won the Ashlander tribes over to his side. Centuries later, the same ring passed to the Nerevarine, his reincarnation, and helped pull the Great Houses and the Ashlanders together again against Dagoth-Ur. What happened to the Dwemer during that war stays disputed even inside Azura's own story. Tribunal orthodoxy holds that Nerevar, Azura, and the future tribunal used the heart of Lorkhan to make the whole Dwemer people vanish outright, while Ashlander tradition generally insists the Dwemer destroyed themselves instead, though a few Ashlander accounts side with the tribunal's version. Before any of that, Nerevar had made Almalexia, Sotasil, and Vivek swear before Azura that they'd never misuse Kagranak's tools, and when they broke that oath after his death, Azura cursed all 3 of them and swore Nerevar would return one day to punish the betrayal. Sotasil brushed her off, so she turned every Chimer into a Dunmer on the spot and bound the whole people to the tribunal's fate until the end of time, which is either a curse or a promise depending on which Dunmer you ask. Once the tribunal fell and the Red Year came, the dissident priests who took over declared Azura, Boethia, and Mephala the true way forward, worshipped now as the Reclamations. One small offshoot of her modern following, a sect called the Lepidopterans, wears butterfly masks to hide their identities during worship. By the early Second Era, the same mask had drifted out of religious use entirely and turned into a fashion trend among disillusioned young Dunmer on the mainland who probably had no idea what it originally meant. Her involvement with mortals runs through several centuries of smaller stories too. Around the year 405 of the Third Era, an agent of the Blades killed a monk who'd offended her and got Azura's star as payment, the same reusable soul gem later carried by the Nerevarine, who received it as a reward for a bet Azura won against Sheogorath, the same kind of wager Vermina had lost to him centuries before. By the Third Era's end, the hero of Kuwatch had to put down a group of her own worshippers who'd been accidentally turned into vampires while in her service. Later still, in Skyrim, her priests eventually abandoned an old shrine entirely, afraid of what her visions kept showing them about their own future. By the year 200, one of the Fourth Era, the star itself had been corrupted into something called the Black Star, carrying the trapped black soul of a dying mage, before the last Dragonborn tracked it down and cleansed it. Khajiit myth goes further into her own grief than the simple story of her mother's death. Azura was born in the same litter as Lorkhaj, and when Lorkhaj tricked his own siblings into helping create the world, killing many of them in the process, the survivors turned on him and killed him for it. What was left behind was a wound where his heart used to be, and the great darkness poured into it. Azura, already grieving, recognized that same darkness inside her dying brother, physically tore it out of him along with the rest of it, and hurled it into the void, where it became the moon beast, the very first of the Dromathra. Lorkhaj died in her arms right after. She built his funeral pyre herself and lit it using the twin lanterns of Joan and Jode. And it's this same grief, doubled over from losing both a mother and a brother in the same telling, that some versions credit with driving the tears that made Moonshadow in the first place. Noctra, the shadow spirit born out of Lorkhaj's black blood, gets two different endings depending on which Khajiiti source is doing the telling. One account has her using the skeleton key on herself to keep another prince away from the Aether Prism during a battle to protect the Lunar Lattice, a story tied more to Vermina's own defeat than to Azura's. A second, separate account has Azura defeating and judging Noctra directly, sparing her only on the condition that she serve as a protector of the Khajiit, and Noctra repaying that mercy by stealing one of Azura's own keys and fleeing into the void anyway. Nobody has ever reconciled the two stories into one, and both are still told as though they're simply true. Now, let's move on to the Clockwork City. The Clockwork City is Sotasil's own creation, a metal copy of Nirn built small enough to fit inside a globe no larger than a good-sized niche, and getting inside it requires being magically shrunk down first. Somehow the interior doesn't match the outside at all. Once inside, the realm is an entire world, expansive, layered, and functionally endless, even though from the outside it could sit on a table. Nobody has ever pinned down exactly where the globe is at any given moment, since most descriptions of finding the city describe methods of travel instead of a fixed location, and some accounts hold that it never stops moving in the first place. What makes the place unsettling is that the machinery answers to one will. In many respects, the Clockwork City is Sotasil himself, down to a mechanical level. Something as small as how food tastes inside the city gets decided by whatever Sotasil has willed it to taste like, and there's no guarantee that even magic can override a decision he's already made. Divide Fear, who studied the place directly, described it as an incomprehensibly powerful world-shaping device. Walking through the Clockwork City means walking through the inside of a god's intentions, and the god in question can change the rules whenever he wants to. A glass dome, called the Celestiodrome, wraps the entire realm and fakes a day and night cycle, while the halls of regulation keep the water, air, humidity, and wind circulating the way a living world would need to. Outside the main settlement lies the Radius, a metal wilderness built to mimic the biomes of Tamriel laid over a harsh, metallic desert. Underneath the Brass Fortress, the city's main settlement, sit the maintenance tunnels of the mechanical fundament, and buried in the center of those tunnels is the Cogitum Centralis, described as the axle that spins the whole wheel, holding Sotasil's own seat of power at its heart. Food inside the Clockwork City mostly comes down to nutriment paste, a thick, flavorless filling substance with the consistency of porridge, served straight out of dispensers. It keeps people fed and does nothing else, and long exposure to it can cause a condition called cyclical inert ingestion, a fatigue of the palate so severe that sufferers start compulsively eating things that aren't food at all, just to feel something on the tongue again. A wellspring elsewhere in the city grows fruit and vegetables using water and light, but keeping it running costs someone's life force, so it's never been a practical substitute. Citizenship functions as a trap dressed up as an honor. Most people who wind up inside the Clockwork City have no way back to Tamriel once they arrive, and they need a sponsor from among the current residents just to be allowed to stay. Some residents call life there a miracle. Others call it an unending nightmare, and both descriptions are on record from people who lived there at the same time. Fabricants, part living flesh and part metal graft, are grown to fill the role of Nirn's animals, since the metal soil can barely support plant life. Factotums, fully synthetic and usually built in human form, handle everything else, and Sotasil experimented at least once with pouring a mortal soul into one of them. It worked, in the sense that the body kept moving. The 3 temple saints who went through the process all lost their minds instead, which is why the practice got banned soon after. Life inside the city sorts itself into a strict pecking order. clockwork apostles sit at the top, a skill-gated elite who mark their devotion by replacing their own limbs with clockwork prosthetics and govern through something called the Congress of Calibration. Below them come the auxiliaries, skilled outsiders allowed to work and trade inside the walls, and at the bottom sit the Tarnished, an unskilled underclass crammed into a district called Slag Town. Outsiders get called exodromals, a word that marks them as visitors from a world the city barely bothers pretending still matters. Only apostles get to use something called the Doors of Egress, a teleportation system that can move a person straight out of the city. Ordinary citizens are simply told the doors don't exist at all, which means most of the people trapped inside never learned that an exit was sitting there the whole time, reserved for people who already didn't need one. Sotha Sil kept his own memories stored as literal stars inside a chamber called the mnemonic planisphere, tended for centuries by a single caretaker known only as the astronomer. A private workshop called the Divinity Atelier let him bleed off and study pieces of his own divine essence directly, using a staff called Sunara as the instrument. Underneath everything, inside the Cogitum Centralis, sat the throne-aligned, his own control seat, wired straight into the chamber of Lorcan, where the mechanical heart itself was being built. Fabricants come in more varieties than the animal-shaped ones roaming the radius, including verminous and hulking types the apostles call the merged ones. Factotums went through their own quiet evolution too. The earliest versions were built using salvaged pieces of Dwemer machinery, while the modern line runs entirely on Sotha Sil's own design with no Dwemer parts left in them at all. The three temple saints just mentioned, the ones whose souls got poured into factotum bodies, had names Felms, Lothis, and Olms. And once the experiment was ruled a failure, all three were sealed away together. The city outlived its own maker in a way that raises more questions than it answers. Sotha Sil was killed inside his own control center by Almalexia, who by then had gone half mad watching her own divinity fade and blamed him for it. He didn't speak or fight back, wired as he was straight into the machinery around him, and in his last act he sealed off the chamber of Lorcan so his automated systems could keep building the unfinished mechanical heart without him. They did exactly that for roughly 200 years by most counts, though the city's own records and outside chronicles disagree by about a year on when the heart finally finished itself. Before Sotha Sil died, he'd once traveled into Cold Harbor himself, back in the year 2920 of the First Era, to strike a bargain directly with Molag Bal after Bal wiped out an entire Bosmeri town in a fit of temper, one of the odder facts about a man who spent most of his life building the opposite of a Daedric realm. Once the heart was finally whole, a banished former apostle named Messinar came looking for it, hoping to seize its power for himself and remake the city's remaining people into fused abominations of flesh and steel. What happened after he was stopped isn't settled. One account says the heart got destroyed in the fight and the city, no longer sustained by anything, was simply abandoned to sit empty. Another says the heart survived, kept running, and the city lived on with it, though whoever finally beat Messinar reportedly paid for it with their own body, which fell apart in the process even as something of them may have lingered on inside the machinery. Nobody has closed that question either way. Debate Fear's own connection to the place runs deeper than one line about a world-shaping device. He was Sotha Sil's friend long before either of them mattered to history, and he told Sotha Sil plainly that he wouldn't worship him even after the tribunal's rise, friendship or not. Centuries later, while Fear was busy expanding his own tower at Telfir into a nearby cave system, a portal to the Clockwork City tore open on its own and spilled fabricants into the tunnels. Fear led a group of adventurers through it to shut the breach down from the inside. That rekindled an old curiosity, and he went hunting for a way back in, first through a ritual on a distant island where a Sijic monk turned him away without a word of explanation. Later, in earnest, when Nocturnal tried to steal the city out from under its maker using a stolen key, Fear held the line just long enough for help to arrive and keep Sotha Sil alive. And Sotha Sil rewarded him afterward by handing him the key itself for safekeeping, one god's last vote of confidence in the one friend who'd never once pretended to worship him. Let's move on to Evergloam. Evergloam belongs to Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Shadow, and it doesn't sit apart from the rest of reality the way most Oblivion realms do. It sits right up against everything else, described as adjacent to every other realm at the same time, close enough that turning quickly in the dark can almost catch a glimpse of it. Forests cover most of the primary plane, their shadows stretched long across a purple landscape dotted with crumbling buildings and crypts that have sunk halfway into the ground. Souls that end up in the Evergloam become something called shadows. They can still sleep, but they never wake up rested, not once, for as long as they exist there. Worse, they crave light and can never enjoy it, since any exposure to it weakens and drives them back. That's the whole afterlife on offer, wanting the one thing that hurts to be near. A portal called the Ebonmere connects Evergloam to Nirn through the Twilight Sepulchre in Skyrim, held open by an artifact called the Skeleton Key. A group of thieves called the Nightingales guard both the portal and the key, and when a nightingale dies, tradition holds that the soul becomes one with the shadows themselves, walking among them and bringing luck to thieves back on Nirn so long as the Ebonmere stays open. Nocturnal's realm splits into pocket realms as well as the main plane. The Shade Perilous holds a rare, harvestable form of Darkling magic and was fought over during Mehrunes Dagon's invasion of the Battle Spire. Crowswood is a deliberately poor copy of an ordinary forest, ruled by a feudal court of sentient crows called the Blackfeather Court, currently led by a Hagraven known as the Crow Mother. A third pocket, the Garden of Shadows, appears from a distance to be an ordinary wooded clearing at dusk, except that it's filled with graves, corpses, and rows of carved pumpkins that never rot. Nocturnal herself claims a title, Urdra, that implies she's the oldest and most powerful of all the Daedric princes, older than Oblivion itself, according to her own followers. One of her stolen artifacts, the Grey Cowl, carries a curse that strips the wearer's name and history from the memory of everyone who ever knew them so thoroughly that no record of who wore it survives. In a realm built around losing the light and losing the self, that curse fits right in. Nocturnal answers to a long list of names too: the Lady of the Night, the Unfathomable, Empress of Murk, Lady Luck among them, and she's tied closely to ravens and crows so dark they show no other color, birds said to be able to speak when she wills it. Her title, Urdra, is supposed to mean she's the oldest and most powerful Daedric prince there is, a claim nearly every other prince, and even Sota Sil himself, have gone along with at one point or another. The trouble is that ancient Khajiit used the exact same title for Namira long before anyone wrote it down for Nocturnal, and Hermaeus Mora has separately been called older than the Aedra themselves. 3 different princes all claim to be the oldest thing in existence, and nothing in any record settles which one, if any, is telling the truth. An old folktale called the Song of Hrormir gives her a hideous true face hidden underneath the grey cowl, one she only shows when the cowl comes off. In the story, she captures a man named Darfang's soul and puppets his body into attacking his own friend Hrormir, who bargains his way into taking Darfang's place instead. Hrormir tricks his way out of the deal through clever wordplay that makes his oath non-binding, steals the cowl off her while she isn't looking, and gets a look at her true face once the light comes back. She lets him go in exchange for getting the cowl back and accepts the loss without much fuss. Nobody treats the story as anything but folklore, though there's an artifact tied to it, an item called Hrormir's Ice Staff, which exists regardless of whether the rest of the tale ever happened. The skeleton key that opens the Ebonmere didn't start out in Nocturnal's hands either, at least not the version tied to a much bigger theft. She once teamed up with Clavicus Vile and Mephala to steal something called the Heart of Transparent Law out of the Crystal Tower, using a mind-controlled Sijic leader to smuggle it away and hide it inside his own body until he forgot it was even there, a plot that left the Sijic Order and the whole island of Artaeum missing from the world for a long stretch afterward. Once the job was done, Nocturnal turned on both of her partners, banished them, and tried to use the tower's strange relationship with reality to make herself present everywhere at once, absorbing power by invading other princes' own realms one at a time. It took the combined effort of a small army, mortal and divine both, to stop her before she finished the job, and the skeleton key changed hands more than once in the chaos that followed before it settled back where it usually lives, at the threshold between Evergloam and everything else. The Nightingales themselves nearly disappeared once already. When the skeleton key got stolen out from under them in the Fourth Era, the whole Thieves' Guild shrank down to almost nothing. It was a woman named Carlia who finally made things right, apologizing to Nocturnal directly and bringing 2 new recruits into the fold as a kind of offering, one of them the last Dragonborn. The theft itself cost a man named Mercer Frey his life, killed beneath the great statue inside the ruin of Irkenfand, and once the Ebon Mirror reopened, the Dragonborn got to choose which of the Nightingale's own powers to carry going forward. Breaking the Grey Cowl's curse for good, the one that strips a wearer's name and history out of everyone who ever knew them, has only ever been managed using an Elder Scroll. Doing it was powerful enough to bend time itself in the process, which says something about how deep that curse runs. She's made other gifts too. The Bow of Shadows, forged for a ranger named Rerlas Gile, who never came back from the secret mission it was meant for, grants invisibility and speed to anyone who carries it now. The Eye of Nocturnal is less understood, though she's claimed more than once that she watches Nirn through it herself. Next is the Deadlands. The Deadlands belong to Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Destruction, and the realm is built entirely out of his sphere, meaning nothing there ever gets to stay the same for long. A section called the Burn is just an ocean of lava dotted with scorched volcanic islands and the husks of ruined buildings. Rivers of fire cut through the landscape and reverse direction every few hundred years, which means any map anyone draws of the Deadlands is obsolete within a lifetime or two. The Force scholars call change runs so strongly through this realm that touching it directly is dangerous even for Daedra who know what they're doing. Anyone who tries to tap into that current risks slipping into what's called a synchros Asiac state, falling out of sync with reality itself and getting scattered across time and space with no guarantee of ever landing back in one piece. Towers built in the Deadlands follow a distinct, grim style, ornamental spikes, dim lighting, and rotting corpses strapped directly to the walls as decoration. Most of these towers are hollow inside, built around a single shaft with walkways spiraling up toward the top floor. Smaller towers exist purely to hold prisoners, and getting a captive up or down inside one often means using something called a corpse smasher, an elevator built for executions rather than transport. Even the plants in the Deadlands are stranger than they look. What appears to be burnt grass and dead trees is often very much alive, just adapted to the realm's own destructive cycles. The Ember Oak feeds on lightning strikes. The End Times Ash Tree needs to be burned down completely before it can grow again. The wildlife matches the mood. Flaming black beasts called Nightmare Coursers, Nightmare Senches, and Nightmare Wolves stalk the burnt ground, alongside a scuttling horror called the Mud Crab of Eternal Doom, which somehow thrives in heat that should kill anything. The realm's most powerful creature, the Ash Titan, was first created by Molag Bal as a fiery mockery of dragons, before finding its true home serving Dagon instead. A strict, warlike hierarchy runs the realm underneath Dagon himself, from his personal guard down through several ranks of commanders to the lowest tier, the churls, described plainly as undistinguished rabble, vicious to mortals and to lesser Daedra, but obedient to anyone above them. Where Dagon comes from depends entirely on which account gets trusted, and the three on record don't agree even a little. Mankar Camoran's own writings claim the Magna Ge secretly built him inside a place called the Bowels of Lig as a prince of good, meant to lead a slave revolt. That he earned the title Sea's Flame Redeemer, freeing people from that world before anyone called him Mehrunes Dagon at all, a claim the source itself never confirms. A separate, more obscure Nordic tale calls him a kinder being entirely, cursed into his current shape by Alduin. A third version, held by a cult called the Order of the Waking Flame, says the Magna Ge built him purely as a weapon, meant to unmake a flawed Mundus, so Magnus could start it over clean. A rival theory inside that same tradition argues instead that the fleeing Magna Ge simply abandoned the unfinished work in disgust, and Dagon's whole nature grew out of that abandonment rather than any plan. Nobody has ever settled which one, if any, is close to true. His worshippers call themselves the Oath-Sworn of the Red Father or the Scarlet Reavers of the Razor King, and some go through physical change to prove it, ritual scourging that leaves the skin looking scaled, or flensing before a sacred crimson ink gets worked into the wound, a process that leaves veteran cultists able to shrug off heat that would kill anyone else. Dunmer tradition keeps two separate stories about Vivec humiliating him, both still reenacted today by a bound Dremora standing in for Dagon's part. One has Vivec tricking Dagon into throwing a boulder that lands on Dagon himself instead, remembered now as the magic rock of Margan and reenacted at that site by a Dremora named Anhedra. The other has Vivec refusing to fight an unarmed Dagon and handing over his own silver longsword instead, reenacted at the Shrine of Courtesy in Vivec City by a different bound Dremora named Krast. Whatever Dagon is elsewhere, in Dunmer memory he's mostly the god who kept losing to Vivec. A cult called the Order of the Waking Flame tells its own stories about him, including one where he saved a devoted enchanter from a spell she'd badly miscalculated, turning her own runaway tidal wave into steam before it could drown her. Another has the cult invading Coldharbour itself to pull enslaved worshippers back out of Molag Bal's hands, with Dagon personally dueling Bal as a distraction loud enough that thunder seemed to roll out of every blow. He couldn't finish Bal off outright and had to settle for getting his own people clear. A third vision, shown to one of the cult's own devastators, put Dagon inside the ruins of a citadel he once ruled from, a place called Destruction's Solace, and had him admit plainly that he was the one who tore it down himself. Destruction is what he is, and being what he is leaves him no choice in the matter. Beyond the razor, he keeps an axe too, fiery and double-bitted, that no mortal has ever been trusted to carry, shown only in statues raised at half a dozen ruins across Tamriel. A pair of sabatons called the Ground Splitters can crack the ground open with a single stomp. One sword, called the Moonreaver, was supposedly forged out of Dagon's own substance, and it's the only weapon anyone believes could wound him directly. His armies run on a strict ladder of rank, from ordinary Kine up through Vulcan, Vulcanaz, Markin, and Kine Marcher, down to the churls at the very bottom. Molag Bal sits near the top of his enemies list, the two of them locked in a rivalry made mostly of meddling in each other's schemes, rather than open war. Now let's look at the Scuttling Void. The Scuttling Void belongs to Namira, and the Khajiit call it the Dark Behind the World, sometimes shortened to just the Dark. What's known about the place physically is thin, floating stones, ruins, glowing plants, and coral, all under a purple sky lit up with auroras. But what happens there to the mind is well documented, and it's worse than the geography. Namira's whole role in Khajiiti belief is the opposite of the guide who's supposed to carry souls onward after death. Instead, she corrupts them through something called the Bent Dance, twisting them until they can be dragged down into the dark behind the world. These corrupted spirits, called Dromathra or Lost Cats, slip back out through cracks in reality to tempt the living, hoping to drag more souls down to serve Namira alongside them. Somewhere deep inside the realm, there are grim forges and bent benches where these corrupted spirits dance and arm themselves for whatever comes next. The clearest story attached to this realm comes from the Temple of Seven Riddles, where a moon bishop known as the Stone Tapper once carried a magic stick that told him secrets whenever he tapped it against the floor. Day and night he tapped, and the stick kept talking until it ran out of ordinary secrets about the world and started telling him Namira's secrets instead. He kept listening anyway, growing old and losing his mind a little more each day, and the other monks in the temple went mad right along with him because the tapping never once stopped, unbroken, for years. Eventually, the monks had enough. They lured the Stone Tapper to the temple's high chamber and stabbed him to death, and when his blood hit the floor, it carried all those secrets out with it and tore the temple apart, ripping open a maw of Lorkhaj, one of the large breaches between this realm and the dark behind the world. Namira herself is often described through what she inspires, rather than what she looks like: slugs, spiders, rot, and squalor, the small things that make skin crawl on instinct. Her worship asks very little of some followers. Simply living in darkness and filth is enough for a few, while others take it much further into ritual murder and even cannibalism. Anyone she fully ensnares gets tortured until they forget who they used to be and know only her. Namira goes by other names depending on who's asking. Lady of Decay, Mistress of Hunger, Goddess of the Dark, and she's never settled into one single image either. Some accounts describe her as a robed woman walking beside a scrawny beast. Others describe a cloaked, slug-bodied thing with a skeletal face and too many legs. A few creation stories go further still, claiming she corrupted Lorkhan directly or struck her own private bargain with him while Mundus was still being made, a role that would put her at the center of creation itself rather than off at its rotting edges. Reachmen who worship her call her Nymeria, the Spirit Queen, the Black Fly, sovereign over what they describe as the whole infinite world of spirit. Their creation story has a figure called Lork, convincing Namira to grant a realm for wandering spirits at the cost of his own life. Once that bargain was struck, Hircine stepped in as sovereign of the world of flesh instead, splitting the job of the dead and the job of the living cleanly between the two princes. That same tradition holds that at the end of all days, when Lork's own heart wakes up and consumes everything, only Namira's faithful will be spared. Namira doesn't ask much of some of her followers. Just living in filth is enough for a few, but darker clans take it much further. The Bold Claw clan holds a bonfire ritual called Namira's Dance, where dancers painted to represent birth and dancers painted to represent death perform together and blood gets smeared on the tribe afterward. Other clans practice outright human sacrifice, generating something called void stuff that can turn a witch into a void mother, capable of consuming a victim's soul whole. The Crowwife clan draws lots every 2 months on the dark of the moon to choose a child, kin or slave, to sacrifice on what they call the ever-oozing altar, the heart cut out by the clan's own Hagraven matriarch, and children judged too weak get the same fate. Namira doesn't consider it cannibalism when mortals eat creatures such as ogres, and she'd reportedly take offense if a follower called it that, which says something about how differently she sorts the world into food and not food. She also treats it as an insult when someone uses her gifts just to dodge a death that was supposed to happen naturally. One of her older weapons still sits sealed under Skyrim. 2 Chimeri mages who worshipped her built a disease called the Spell Plague, specifically to use against the Dwemer, one whose victims came back as dire apparitions rather than staying dead. The whole thing got sealed away with its own creators beneath what's now called Heimland Keep, guarded ever since by House Telvanni. It surfaced again centuries later when the Daggerfall Covenant mistook the keep for an ordinary military outpost and opened the wrong door. The Maw of Lorkhaj that opened when the Stone Tapper died didn't stay sealed forever either. Long after the original temple fell apart, an abbot there deliberately broke the seals again, and a Dromatra called Rakat tore free before a group of adventurers cut it down, with a Twilight Cantor stepping in afterward to reseal the breach a second time. Let's move on to the Hunting Grounds. Hircine's realm, the Hunting Grounds, gets called a paradise by the people who end up there, and that's what makes it worse than Ashpit, where at least nobody dresses up the suffering as anything other than what it is. Anyone who dies inside the realm stays there permanently. For Hircine's devoted followers, that's the whole point. Death inside the Hunting Grounds simply resets into another body that never sickens or ages, so the cycle of hunting, dying, and coming back can run forever. During daylight hours, werebears and Nords who've earned a place there stalk the woods on their own hunts. Once the sun goes down, Hircine shows up in person with a full pack of werewolves and takes his own turn in the cycle. The landscape stretches across dense forest and open grassland, but it varies more than that description suggests. One section is an endless savanna lit by a red sun, its river running the color of blood, home to antelope with twisted horns and cattle standing 6 feet at the shoulder. Another section, the March of Sacrifices, is built to resemble a Tamrielic marsh, split into 3 zones that shift from dusk lighting to full night as anyone crosses through them. A lava tube called the Hunter's Grotto cuts through part of the realm too, lush vegetation growing right alongside pools of magma. Souls of lycanthropes get claimed by Hircine as a matter of course, whether they worshipped him in life or not, and they spend eternity there running down prey through his forests. There's one narrow way out of that fate. If the curse gets lifted from a body after death, but before the soul reaches the hunting grounds, that soul can still make it to whatever proper afterlife it was originally owed, Sovngarde included. That window is thin and depends entirely on someone else acting fast enough on behalf of the dead, which is the kind of mercy that almost never arrives in time. Now to Blackreach, a realm nobody needs a portal or a ritual to reach, since it sits directly underneath Skyrim. Blackreach runs beneath a huge stretch of Skyrim, an immense cavern the Dwemer called Faljardum Din, the blackest kingdom reaches, possibly extending under all 9 holds of the province. Giant mushrooms glow bright enough to light the place on their own, and the river runs through the dark alongside veins of rare minerals nobody has to mine from the surface world at all. The most overlooked fact about Blackreach is who got there first. Long before the Dwemer ever built anything down there, the first vampire clans on Tamriel had already settled the cavern and built kingdoms of their own, sometime between the Merethic era and the 2nd century of the First Era. One of those clans, the Night Hollow, found an artifact called the Dark Heart and grew dependent on the strange void energy it gave off. That dependency came at a cost. The Night Hollow vampires lost the ability to feed on blood entirely, sustained instead by the Heart's energy, and ruled the reach above them from the shadows below as the Night Lords. The Dwemer arrived after that and turned Blackreach into a working highway, connecting several of their cities with great lifts that carried people down from the surface. They built an entire settlement, the Silent City, right at the center of the cavern, guarded by dwarven centurions patrolling the roads, and farmed mushrooms in the damp dark for food. The cavern even served as the lair of a dragon, Volturiol, who stayed dormant there long after the Dwemer themselves vanished around the year 700 of the First Era. An alliance of Dwemer city-states eventually found the Dark Heart and stole it outright from the Night Hollow clan, building an entire orrery to chart the void using its power inside something called the Library of Archtsand. Disputes over the mineral Aetherium tore that alliance apart soon after, in a conflict remembered as the Aetherium Wars, and the collapse that followed helped end Dwarven civilization in Skyrim for good, leaving the library and its Dark Heart to sit abandoned in the dark for centuries. The heart didn't stay quiet forever. Centuries later, a vampire lord named Rada al-Saran tracked it down beneath the Reach and struck a bargain with the Night Hollow matriarch, Lady Belain, to restore it using an old prophecy, part of a wider plan to reshape vampirism across Tamriel. The plan escalated into a direct assault on the Night Hollow's own fortress, and by the time it was finished, the Dark Heart had been reawakened rather than destroyed, still sitting down there, still drawing on whatever it draws on, with no guarantee it stays dormant this time either. Let's take a look at Umbriel. Umbriel was a floating island split off from Clavicus Vile's own realm by the Daedra Umbra, and calling it beautiful wouldn't be wrong. Castles hanging from cables, towers built out of spun glass, whole buildings jutting straight out of bare rock. None of that beauty ran for free. Umbriel stayed in the sky through a device called an ingenium, and the ingenium ran on the deaths of the people underneath it, killed on the ground below and drained to keep the island afloat. All of it sustaining a pact Umbriel's rulers had made with Umbra. The island invaded Tamriel directly in the year 48 of the Fourth Era, appearing first off the coast of Black Marsh near Lilmoth, summoned there by a rogue hissed tree that could somehow speak to the similar trees growing on Umbriel itself. From there, it drifted north, then turned west toward the Imperial City, trying to tear itself free of Clavicus Vile's realm for good by tapping into the power of the White Gold Tower. It ended up somewhere else instead, settling deep into the boggy ground of the Hist's own realm, roots and all. Life aboard Umbriel bore no resemblance to life on Nirn. Umbrielans were born already grown, full adult bodies with no childhood at all, and they lived short lives by any standard. Someone in their early teens already counted as old. When an Umbrielan died, the Ingenium recycled the soul and returned it to a new body through slender, segmented creatures called proforms, though nothing of the old memory ever carried over. Hobbs, hairless creatures with long, delicate fingers and huge, toothless mouths, worked the kitchens as assistants, fetching ingredients for chefs who cooked two entirely different menus depending on rank. Ordinary food for lesser lords and dishes built from spiritual essence itself for the ones above them. One theory ties Umbriel to something still standing on Nirn today. A strange, leafless tree in Whiterun Hold, known as the Sleeping Tree, may have grown from a spore that fell off the floating island as it passed overhead, which would make it one small, rooted piece of Umbriel's own dead ecosystem left behind on a world it once tried to conquer. Now let's move on to Telfir. Telfir sits above a set of caverns known as the Corpusarium, and unlike Umbriel, it might not be cruel by design at all. Diveit Fir, a 4,000-year-old Dunmer sorcerer, uses the caverns to house victims of Corpus, a disease with no cure, and to keep experimenting toward one anyway. Corpus itself came from Dagoth Ur, who created it as what got called the divine disease, spread through contact with a Corpus beast or through a specific curse. It destroys the mind completely and twists the body into grotesque new shapes, and once someone catches it, that's permanent. Weaker victims become mindless Corpus monsters. Stronger cultists, exposed a different way, turn into various ash creatures instead, and by the time Dagoth Ur had spread the blight across Vardenfell in earnest. The Tribunal Temple had settled on one solution for the afflicted who were neither monsters nor cultists, ship them to Telfir and let Diveit Fir deal with it. Fir's own theory cuts against how everyone else treats the disease. He calls Corpus a kind of blessing most mortals simply can't survive intact, since victims stop aging entirely and become immune to every other disease that exists. That theory doesn't make the caverns any less grim to walk through. Rows of people who can die and can be fixed, kept alive by a man still hunting for a version of the cure that works. When the Nerevarine caught Corpus during the Blight Crisis, Fir did manage something close, a treatment that stripped away the deforming, mind-destroying effects while leaving the strength, the endurance, and the disease immunity fully intact. The treatment fell short of a cure. It made the disease survivable in a way none of the people living in the Corpusarium ever got to experience for themselves. One resident down there matters more than the others. Yagrum Bagarn, the last living Dwemer anywhere in the world, caught Corpus on Red Mountain during his own explorations and ended up in Fir's care along with everyone else, bloated and sick, spending what's left of an impossibly long life, a few caverns away from strangers with the same affliction. None of this needs to be played for shock value, and it shouldn't be here either. What's disturbing about the Corpusarium is the plain fact of a cavern full of people who cannot be cured and cannot die, kept comfortable by someone who wants to help them and still hasn't found a way. Next is Bar Dao. Bar Dao hangs above what used to be Vivec City, and depending on which account gets believed, it's either a meteor, a moonlet, or something considerably stranger. The most common legend holds that it was flung out of the void by Sheogorath in one version, or by its own malevolence in another, and that Vivec stopped it in mid-fall with a raised hand rather than let it hit. He left it there on purpose, suspended directly over his own city, so that if the people below him ever stopped loving him, the rock would finally finish falling and kill them all. The sources disagree past that point, and the disagreement stays rather than getting smoothed over. One account, drawn from Vivec's own sermons, claims the rock was literally born of Vivec, waste from his union with Molag Bal, one of several monster children who escaped execution and tried to claim a place in the heavens through that divine parentage before Vivec struck it down and froze it in place as a warning. A separate telling blames Sheogorath entirely, bored and offended that the city below amounted to a mockery of paradise. Another calls it a Magna Ge named Una, a being who got separated from her kin as they fled toward Aetherius and chose to settle beside Vivec City instead, so that neither she nor the world below would be alone. Orcish tradition rejects all of that and calls the rock Malakath's dung, dropped on the city out of spite after Vivec insulted the prince's ogres. Yet another version treats the whole thing as an egg, waiting to hatch the final monstrous offspring of Vivec and Molag Bal. Whatever it was, the Tribunal Temple eventually hollowed the rock out and turned it into a working prison called the Ministry of Truth, holding dissident priests under the authority of a Grand Inquisitor, reachable only by levitation. The whole arrangement, depended entirely on Vivek staying alive and staying powerful, and once he vanished early in the Fourth Era, the magic holding the rock up started to fail. Tu Dunmer, Sol, and Wuhan tried to solve that problem with a device called an Ingenium, the same kind of soul-powered machine that also kept the floating city of Umbriel aloft. Their version ran on a pact with Clavicus Vile, funneling captured souls through a rift into Vile's own realm to keep Bar Dao afloat. Hundreds of souls weren't enough in the end, so living people got fed into the machine instead, and only the strongest souls were chosen for it. Sul's own love, Ilsheven, ended up sacrificed by Wuhon, and when Sul tried to save her, the Ingenium came apart entirely. With nothing left holding it up, Bar Dao finished the fall it had been promising for centuries, in the 5th year of the 4th Era. It obliterated the city underneath it, left behind a crater that became Scathing Bay, sent tsunamis across the rest of Morrowind, and set off the eruption of Red Mountain that devastated the whole island of Vardenfell. Let's look at Apocrypha. Apocrypha belongs to Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, and calling it a library undersells what it is. Most of the realm is an endless library made of untitled books with black covers, holding every piece of forbidden knowledge that's ever existed, stacked into mazes and spiraling pillars that climb as high as the green sky above them. Other stretches of the realm are open fields full of strange plants instead, but underneath everything sits a churning sea of black ink crossed with roiling tentacles, and Mora is described as omnipresent across the whole realm, watching and taking pleasure in tormenting the mortals who end up inside it. Some parts of Apocrypha are simply darkness, and that darkness kills anything that walks into it, no exceptions. Discarded pages and loose tomes drift through fetid air, tugged by some unseen force, and storms of unusual strength roll over the realm on a regular basis. It's also, in one small, oddly specific detail, held up in places by books. Mora reportedly found that his seemingly endless supply of books about mortal romance and sex made decent structural support for parts of his library, which is either a joke at the reader's expense or simply how the place got built. Most mortals get in through black books, cursed tomes scattered across Tamriel that pull a reader's mind into Apocrypha, while an apparition of the body stays behind on Nirn, tethering the life force back home. Most who make it inside get driven insane by the sheer volume of revelation waiting for them there. The mage Morian Zenas, last seen wandering through Quagmire and Moonshadow earlier on this same private tour of Oblivion, finally lost himself here for good, swallowed by the one realm on his itinerary that never let him leave again. Mora's servants match the realm's tone. Lurkers rise up out of the ink to guard it, tall amphibious things with needle teeth, thick armored limbs, and the ability to spit poisonous bile or lash out with dark tendrils from a distance, and their skin heals fast enough that even a serious wound barely slows one down. Watchers and smaller watchlings handle the bureaucratic side of the realm, cataloging knowledge and observing everything as extensions of Mora's own eyes, while creatures called the Hushed, remnants of mortals fully consumed by the realm's knowledge, wander certain restricted areas and can turn violent on anyone who disturbs them without warning. Not every mortal inside Apocrypha is a victim. A community called Cypher's Midden sits at the center of the realm, home to mortal scholars personally invited there by Mora himself, and none of them holds authority over any other, since the only law anyone answers to is Mora's own. Scattered through the realm are also the fossilized remains of enormous sea creatures unlike anything known on Nirn, believed by Mora's faithful to be evidence of wherever the prince originally came from, long before Apocrypha itself existed. The dragon priest Mirak learned his forbidden power here first, back in the Merethic era, using what Mora taught him to turn against the dragons he'd once served. When that rebellion failed and his temple was destroyed, Mirak retreated into Apocrypha and stayed there for centuries, growing in knowledge while he waited for a way back to Tamriel. He eventually got that chance, and lost, and Mora killed his old champion personally rather than let him finish the fight, before turning around and offering the exact same deal to whoever had just beaten him. Now to the Soul Cairn. The Soul Cairn holds trapped souls of the dead, and unlike every other Daedric realm, no Daedric prince runs it. Instead, it answers to beings called the Ideal Masters, who were mortal once, an early order of sorcerers who dealt in souls until they shed their physical bodies entirely and became something else. They described their realm as a refuge, dedicated to peace, love, eternal rest, and harmony. The souls trapped there call it a curse, and the wardens who think they're doing everyone a kindness never seem to notice the difference. The landscape matches the mood exactly: gray, barren, and dead, blackened ruins and gravestones scattered across ground split open by soul fissures, with nothing alive growing anywhere except dead trees and the strange fungus called soul husks. Lightning strikes constantly across the realm, and specialized attractors harness those strikes to manufacture black soul gems on the spot. A structure called the Chapel of Love houses the Emerald Gates, a set of portals that can reach almost any other realm of oblivion, provided whoever's using them already knows the name of where they're going. Souls sent here eventually lose every memory of who they used to be. Only the newest arrivals still carry wisps of a former life, fading fast, and once that's gone, there's nothing left to distinguish one trapped soul from 1,000 others doing the same eternal, empty work around them. The Portal Inn has one strange rule built into it. It rejects the living outright. Only the undead, or the living who are partway soul-trapped already, can get through. Necromancers have made deals with the Ideal Masters for generations, trading souls for the power to summon armies of the dead, and most of them eventually get betrayed and trapped in the realm themselves once the Masters decide the exchange has run its course. Even a dragon wasn't safe from that same trick. Durnevir made a pact here for necromantic power and got assigned to guard a captive vampire named Valerica, never told that she was immortal and would need guarding forever. Centuries in the Soul Cairn changed Durnevir's own body so completely that he can no longer survive anywhere else, trapped in service to the Masters by simple biology rather than any contract they'd have to honor. Finally, let's look at Cold Harbor. Cold Harbor is Molag Bal's own realm, and it earns every bit of its reputation. He built it as a desolate, apocalyptic version of Nirn, achieved partly through mocking imitation and partly through outright theft, entire pieces of the mortal world pulled physically into his own. A defiled copy of the White Gold Tower stands somewhere inside it. The sky burns in a continuous belch of fire that mostly appears as heavy purple cloud from below. The ground is often barely more than cold sludge. The air can shift in a single breath from the stench of rotting death to the smell of flowers, with nothing in between to prepare anyone for the change. Craggy islands of blackened rock coated in blue lichen hang in open void with nothing holding them up but whatever holds Cold Harbor together in the first place. Descriptions of the place vary so widely across different sources that even the scholars who study it can't agree on some of the details, though all of them agree on the basics: cold, dismal, and largely dead. Most of the mortals inside are soul-shriven, husks whose own souls belong permanently to Molag Bal, their bodies kept moving instead by a Daedric vestige standing in for whatever used to be there. They live in a loop of slow torment and rebirth, worked and abused until nothing of the original person is left, and some of them go feral from hunger and start eating anything nearby, lesser Daedra included, each other included. Vampires end up here too, every single one, since a vampire's soul travels to Cold Harbor automatically the moment they die, joining mortals who struck their own deals with Bal while they were still alive. Bal fills the realm with facilities built for cruelty as a kind of hobby as much as a system. A public library called the Library of Dusk offers up nothing but propaganda and doubles as a trap for any scholar unlucky enough to wander in looking for anything worth trusting. Bal keeps a second, more private library inside his own stronghold, shelves running the length of entire cliffs and down into a chasm, stocked with books that are reportedly disturbing even by the standards of everything else in the realm. There are also, for no practical reason anyone has identified, a large number of graveyards scattered around, apparently because Molag Bal simply likes them. Two moments connect this realm directly to the world outside it. Sometime around the year 2260 of the First Era, the All Flags Navy brought down the Coral Tower of Thraz during a naval battle, and the collapse tore open a portal straight into Cold Harbor, pulling entire ships through into the realm along with it. Long after that, one of the King of Worms' own associates, a necromancer named Vastari, braved the ashen wastes of Coldharbour herself, while her fellow necromancers held a portal open behind her, and came back out carrying the first black soul gems anyone on Nirn had ever held. That single heist is what pushed necromancy forward into the practice mortals still use today, built on knowledge stolen out of the One Realm designed to punish anyone who tried. Baal's biggest attempt to take Coldharbour further than theft came during the Interregnum, when his agent Mani Marco tricked an emperor into breaking the ancient covenant that kept Nirn tethered to Akatosh, setting the whole world adrift and exposed. Baal poured dark anchors down to drag pieces of Nirn bodily into his own realm, working to merge the two worlds into one permanent copy. The attempt failed, turned back by an alliance of mortals and by Meridia, an old enemy of Baal's who opened her own stronghold inside Coldharbour as a refuge for the invaders scattered across his realm. Baal ended up banished into the void, inside the exact plane he'd built to trap everyone else. Not one of the worst moments needed a monster to land. A garden a war god calls barely a garden anymore. A library that hands back whatever gets asked of it and breaks the people who ask. Warden's convinced that stealing every memory a soul ever had counts as saving it. And Coldharbour itself, a plane built by a god who wanted a version of home he could ruin on purpose, and then keep